The Willow Creek subdivision seemed like paradise when I first drove through its tree-lined streets 3 years ago. Craftsman-style homes with manicured lawns created a picturesque scene that immediately spoke to me. After a decade of apartment living, I was ready for a place to call my own, somewhere with space and character. When my realtor pulled up to the modest 2-story home on Maple Lane, I knew I had found it. The house itself was beautiful, hardwood floors, granite countertops, and large windows that let in streams of natural light. But what truly captured my heart was the ornate wrought iron gate at the entrance to my front yard. Unlike the standard white picket fences dotting the neighborhood, this gate featured intricate scrollwork forged by my grandfather decades ago for our family home in Vermont. When my parents sold that house after his passing, I had carefully dismantled and stored the gate, waiting for a place worthy of its craftsmanship. The gate was the first thing I installed after closing on the house. I spent an entire weekend setting the posts, hanging the frame, and watching as my grandfather's artistry transformed my new property into something truly special. Neighbors stopped to compliment the unique addition, often pausing to trace the delicate metal vines with their fingers or ask about its origin. Mrs. Santiago, the elderly woman next door, brought over lemonade as I worked. "Such beautiful craftsmanship," she said, handing me a glass. "A welcome change from all the cookie-cutter fences around here." The first 2 months passed without incident. I planted flower beds, repainted the shutters, and slowly made the house my own. The other neighbors seemed pleasant enough. The Johnsons across the street with their 2 young children, the retired Patel couple on the corner who grew prize-winning roses, and several others who exchanged friendly waves when our paths crossed. It was during a community barbecue in the neighborhood park that I first encountered Patricia Wells, the woman I would later know only as Karen. She approached me with a clipboard and a tight smile that never reached her eyes. "You must be the new owner on Maple Lane," she said, her gaze assessing everything from my casual attire to my paper plate piled with potato salad. "I am Patricia Wells, president of the Willow Creek Homeowners Association. We are so pleased to have you join our little community." I thanked her politely, explaining how much I was enjoying the neighborhood. "Yes, it is a beautiful place. We work very hard to keep it that way," she replied, her voice taking on a slightly sharper edge. "You should have received our welcome packet with the HOA bylaws and regulations." I nodded, remembering the thick folder my realtor had handed me at closing. I had skimmed it briefly, noting standard rules about lawn maintenance and exterior paint colors, but had not given it much attention since. "Do review it carefully," Patricia advised. "Adherence to our standards is what maintains our property values." Later that evening, while organizing my home office, I came across the folder containing my property documents. Among them was the original deed with a clause I had not fully registered when purchasing the house. It mentioned the property predated the establishment of the Homeowners Association by several years, with certain exemptions noted in an addendum. I filed it away without giving it much thought, just another piece of paperwork in the blur of home buying. Little did I know that this forgotten document would become my most valuable possession in the months to come. While I arranged my office, outside my window, Patricia slowed her car as she drove past my house, her gaze lingering on my grandfather's gate. The first notice appeared in my mailbox 3 weeks after the barbecue. A cream-colored envelope with the Willow Creek HOA logo contained a formal letter citing a non-conforming yard feature that required immediate attention. The letter specifically mentioned my gate, stating it did not match the approved designs for the neighborhood. I was instructed to remove it within 14 days and replace it with one of the 5 approved styles shown in the attached pamphlet. I stared at the generic fence designs with dismay. Not one of them had a fraction of the character or craftsmanship of my grandfather's creation. I placed the notice on my kitchen counter, deciding to address it later. 3 days later, a second notice arrived. This time, it cited the height of my grass as exceeding the maximum 3-inch requirement. I frowned as I read it, having just mowed the lawn 2 days prior. I stepped outside with a ruler and discovered my grass measured exactly 3¼ inches in the tallest areas. The violation seemed absurdly petty. The notices continued to arrive with increasing frequency. My mailbox flowering vines were deemed excessive vegetation. The bird feeder hanging from my oak tree was an unauthorized wildlife attraction. The burgundy welcome mat by my front door did not conform to the earth tone palette required for exterior accessories. I tried to comply with the reasonable requests. I trimmed back the flowering vines and replaced my welcome mat with a tan one, but I steadfastly ignored all mentions of removing my grandfather's gate. Each time a notice about the gate arrived, I filed it away without response. One Saturday morning, while watering my front garden, Mrs. Santiago shuffled over, looking troubled. "I see Patricia has set her sights on you," she said quietly, glancing toward the street as if afraid of being overheard. "She does this, you know. Finds one thing about a new homeowner she does not like and makes their life difficult." "Why does everyone let her get away with it?" I asked. Mrs. Santiago sighed. "The Richardsons fought her last year over their basketball hoop. Eventually they gave up and moved away. The Millers before them refused to remove their holiday lights by her deadline. She had the HOA fine them daily until they paid nearly $2,000. People either conform or leave." The next day at the local hardware store, I encountered Mark Johnson from across the street. When he saw me browsing lawn fertilizers, he approached with a concerned expression. "Just a heads up," he whispered, leaning close. "Patricia was talking about your place at the last HOA meeting, called your gate an egregious violation, and suggested they might need to take more direct action since you have not responded to the notices." "Direct action," I repeated. "What does that mean?" Mark shrugged uncomfortably. "Just watch out. When the Chen family would not remove their satellite dish last year, someone mysteriously knocked it down in the night. Never proven who did it, but everyone had their suspicions. By the time I returned home, another notice was wedged in my door. This one not only cited the gate, but included a $100 fine for continued noncompliance. That evening, a sharp knock interrupted my dinner. When I opened the door, Patricia Wells stood on my porch, clipboard in hand, and 2 men in polo shirts flanking her. "Good evening," she said briskly. "This is Roger Bentley, our HOA Vice President, and Craig Thompson, our Enforcement Officer. We are here to discuss your ongoing violations." "I have addressed most of the issues," I replied evenly. "The vines are trimmed, the mat is changed." "The gate remains," Patricia interrupted, pointing with her pen. "It violates Section 4, Paragraph 7 of our bylaws. All fencing and gates must conform to approved neighborhood aesthetic standards." I gripped the doorframe tightly. "This gate is a family heirloom. It has sentimental value." "Sentiment does not supersede community standards," she replied coldly. "The rules apply to everyone. You have until the end of the month to remove it, or the fines will increase to $50 daily." As they turned to leave, Patricia paused. "I understand being attached to personal items," she said, her voice falsely sympathetic. "But perhaps you could display it in your backyard where it would not disrupt the neighborhood aesthetic." I watched them walk away, my knuckles white against the wooden doorframe. Something about Patricia's demeanor suggested this was more than rule enforcement. She seemed to take personal satisfaction in my distress. That night, I pulled out the HOA bylaw book, determined to find a way to protect my grandfather's legacy. Rain pattered against my windows as I sat at my desk, surrounded by stacks of HOA bylaws, community guidelines, and legal reference books borrowed from the library. For 2 weeks, I had spent every evening combing through these documents, searching for something that would protect my gate from Patricia's crusade. My grandfather had crafted the gate during the final years of his life. After retiring from 50 years as a blacksmith, his hands had begun to stiffen with arthritis, yet he insisted on creating one last piece for the family. I remembered watching him work, his gnarled fingers somehow still precise as he shaped the metal into flowing vines and delicate leaves. "This will stand long after I am gone," he had told me. "Good craftsmanship always outlasts the craftsman." When he passed away 3 years later, the gate became more than metal. It was his legacy, a physical manifestation of his spirit and skill. I traced my fingers over a particularly intricate curl of ironwork, feeling closer to him. The deeper I dove into the HOA documentation, the more I found that contradicted Patricia's rigid interpretation. Section 6 of the bylaws specifically mentioned exceptions for architectural features of historical or artistic significance. Another passage referenced respecting original construction elements predating the establishment of community guidelines. By any reasonable reading, my gate should qualify for protection. Armed with highlighted documents and carefully prepared arguments, I submitted a formal appeal to the HOA board, requesting an exemption based on the gate's artistic and historical value. I included photographs of my grandfather at his forge and close-ups of the exceptional craftsmanship. The board meeting was scheduled for a Tuesday evening in the community center. I arrived early, rehearsing my points in my head. The room gradually filled with homeowners, many of whom nodded sympathetically in my direction. When Patricia entered with the other board members, the room fell silent. My appeal was the third item on the agenda. When my name was called, I presented my case clearly and concisely, referencing specific bylaws that supported my position. Several neighbors nodded in agreement as I spoke. I concluded by inviting the board to examine the gate in person to appreciate its artistic merit. Patricia spoke next, her voice measured but cold. "While we appreciate the sentimental attachment to this item, the bylaws are clear. The exemptions mentioned are intended for original architectural features of the home itself, not additions made by current owners. The gate was installed after purchase and thus is subject to current standards." The other board members looked to Patricia, then back to me. Despite the evidence I had presented, I watched as one by one, they voted to deny my appeal. The final vote was 4-1 against me, with only the newest board member, a middle-aged teacher named David, supporting my position. As the meeting adjourned, several neighbors approached to express their disappointment with the decision. "They never rule against her," whispered Eileen Parker, who lived 2 doors down. "My rock garden was denied last year even though 3 other homes have them." Patricia threatened to report Thomas Miller's home business to the city when he opposed her on the community pool hours, added another neighbor. "The board is terrified of crossing her." David, the dissenting board member, caught up with me in the parking lot. "I am sorry about the vote," he said quietly. "For what it is worth, I think your gate is beautiful. Patricia has had an iron grip on this community for too long." That night, I received emails from 5 different neighbors sharing their own HOA horror stories. Mrs. Santiago sent over homemade cookies with a note reading, "Do not let her break your spirit." Mark Johnson, offered to help research legal options. A small support network was forming around our shared frustration. Unable to sleep, I sat in my darkened living room staring out at my gate illuminated by the street lamp. A movement caught my eye, a figure walking slowly past my house, stopping to examine the gate. I recognized Patricia's silhouette immediately. She glanced around furtively before pulling something from her bag, a measuring tape. She carefully measured the gate's height and width, making notes on a small pad. My security camera, installed after Mark's warning about direct action, recorded the entire scene. I watched the footage on my phone in real time, a cold feeling settling in my stomach. This late-night inspection went beyond bureaucratic enforcement. It felt invasive, almost predatory. The following morning, I reviewed the security footage again. Patricia had spent nearly 15 minutes examining every inch of my gate, occasionally taking photos with her phone. The calculated nature of her actions made it clear this was personal. I saved the footage to my computer and made several backups. Something told me this evidence might prove valuable. As rain continued to fall outside, I made a decision. I would not remove my grandfather's gate, no matter what pressure Patricia applied. This was no longer about a neighborhood aesthetic. It was about standing up to a bully. The sound of my alarm jarred me awake at 6:30 a.m. Sunlight streamed through my bedroom window as I followed my usual morning routine: shower, coffee, breakfast while checking emails. Nothing suggested this day would be different from any other. I finished my coffee and headed toward the front door to collect the newspaper. When I opened the door, the peaceful morning shattered. My grandfather's gate hung askew, the right hinge barely attached to the post. The intricate lock mechanism, a small work of art itself featuring a hidden latch disguised within the ironwork, had been completely destroyed. Metal fragments littered the walkway, glinting in the morning sun like cruel confetti. My coffee mug slipped from my grip, shattering on the porch as I stumbled forward. The damage was deliberate and extensive. Clean cuts marked where bolt cutters had sliced through metal components. The lock had not merely been picked or forced, it had been violently cut apart with heavy tools. One section of decorative scrollwork hung precariously, nearly severed from the main structure. I knelt beside the gate, carefully picking up a piece of the broken lock. My grandfather had designed this mechanism himself, proud of its clever construction. Now it lay in ruins, destroyed beyond repair. Tears welled in my eyes as I cradled the metal fragment, a mixture of grief and rage building inside me. The gate had survived decades, traveled across states, and withstood countless seasons only to be vandalized in my supposedly safe neighborhood. I ran my fingers along the jagged edges where the metal had been cut, feeling as violated as if someone had broken into my home. Oh my goodness, what happened? Mrs. Santiago stood at the edge of my property, her hand covering her mouth in shock. "Someone vandalized my gate last night," I replied, my voice thick with emotion. "Patricia," Mrs. Santiago whispered, not a question but a statement. I nodded slowly, remembering the security camera I had installed after Mark's warning. I pulled out my phone and opened the security app, scrolling to last night's footage. Mrs. Santiago stood beside me as I played the video. The timestamp showed 2:17 a.m. The night vision camera captured Patricia approaching my gate with purpose, glancing around to ensure no witnesses. From a large bag, she removed a pair of bolt cutters. Without hesitation, she positioned them over the lock and squeezed the handles. The crunch of metal was almost audible even in the silent footage. She continued methodically, cutting through critical junctions in the ironwork, occasionally stepping back to assess her progress. The entire act took less than 10 minutes. "You have her on camera," Mrs. Santiago gasped. "You must call the police immediately." My hands shook as I dialed 911, explaining the situation to the dispatcher. While waiting for officers to arrive, I took photos documenting the damage from every angle. Several neighbors emerged from their homes, drawn by the commotion. Mark Johnson jogged over from across the street, his expression darkening as he surveyed the destruction. "This crosses a line," he said firmly. "This is criminal property damage." 2 police officers arrived within 20 minutes. Officer Chen, a young woman with a serious demeanor, took notes as I explained the situation. Officer Rodriguez, her partner, examined the damaged gate closely. "You have video evidence of the vandalism?" Officer Chen asked. I nodded, showing them the footage on my phone. Both officers watched intently, their expressions hardening as Patricia's actions played out on screen. "This is clear criminal damage to property," Officer Rodriguez confirmed. "The video provides strong evidence. We will need a formal statement from you and a copy of that footage." As the officers continued documenting the scene, a silver SUV pulled up in front of my house. Patricia stepped out, dressed immaculately in a cream pantsuit, her face a mask of concern that did not reach her eyes. She approached with confident strides, clipboard in hand. "I received reports of a disturbance," she announced, eyeing the police officers. "As HOA president, I should be informed of any incidents in our community." Her gaze fell on the damaged gate, and for a brief moment, something like satisfaction flickered across her features before she composed herself. "What happened here?" she asked, her voice dripping with false concern. "Someone vandalized my gate overnight," I replied coldly. "The police are investigating." Officer Chen turned toward Patricia. "Ma'am, do you live nearby?" "I am Patricia Wells, president of the Willow Creek Homeowners Association," she replied, straightening her posture. "I live 3 blocks over on Oakwood Drive." "And what brings you here this morning?" Officer Rodriguez asked, his tone conversational but watchful. "As I said, I received calls about a disturbance. Part of my responsibility is monitoring neighborhood activities," Patricia explained. She turned to me with a thin smile. "Though I must point out that this unfortunate incident might have been avoided if you had complied with HOA regulations regarding approved gate styles." "Are you suggesting the HOA authorized this damage?" Officer Chen asked sharply. Patricia's smile faltered. "Of course not. However, as HOA president, I do have authority to enforce compliance with our bylaws. That gate has been in violation for months despite numerous notices. HOA regulations do not permit destruction of private property," Officer Rodriguez stated firmly. "That would be a criminal offense." I am simply nodding that situations like this can be avoided through proper compliance," Patricia insisted, her voice losing some of its composure. I stepped forward, phone in hand. "Officers, I believe you should see this." I played the security footage again, this time within Patricia's view. The color drained from her face as she watched herself on the screen, bolt cutters in hand, methodically destroying my gate. The officers observed her reaction carefully. "Ms. Wells," Officer Chen said evenly, "we will need to ask you some questions about your whereabouts last night." Patricia's confident facade crumbled momentarily before she pulled herself together. "This is absurd. The HOA has enforcement authority. That gate violates our community standards." "Enforcement authority does not extend to property destruction," Officer Rodriguez countered. "And based on this evidence, we have reason to believe you personally vandalized this property." As the officers continued questioning Patricia, I retrieved my property deed and associated documents from my office. Something told me I would need them soon. When I returned, Patricia was gesturing animatedly toward my house. Every homeowner signed an agreement to abide by HOA regulations when they purchased in Willow Creek, she insisted. The authority is binding. I clutched my property paperwork tighter, a plan forming in my mind. Sometimes the perfect moment for revelation requires patience. The day after the vandalism, I sat in the wood-paneled office of Marion Benson, a real estate attorney recommended by Mark Johnson. Sunlight filtered through vertical blinds, casting striped shadows across the polished desk between us. I had brought every document related to my property: the deed, purchase agreement, title insurance, and the mysterious addendum I had noticed months ago but never fully examined. So this woman, the HOA president, destroyed your gate and is now claiming she had authority to do so? Marion asked, adjusting her glasses as she sorted through my paperwork. Yes, the police took my statement and the video evidence, but she maintains the HOA gave her the right to enforce compliance by any means necessary, I explained. Marion shook her head in disbelief. HOAs have certain powers, but destruction of private property is never one of them. At most, they can issue fines or place liens, not take vigilante action. She continued reviewing my documents, occasionally making notes or pausing to examine a particular page more closely. When she reached the property deed with its attached addendum, her expression changed. "This is interesting," she murmured, leaning forward. "Your property has a grandfather clause exemption." "What does that mean exactly?" I asked. "Your home was built in 1978, predating the establishment of the Willow Creek HOA by nearly 5 years, Marion explained, her finger tracing specific lines in the document. "When the HOA was formed in 1983, the original owner of your property agreed to certain aesthetic guidelines but maintained exemptions for existing structures." She flipped to another page, eyebrows rising. "Even more interesting, there is specific language here stating that the property maintains perpetual easement and exemption rights regarding entry features, including gates and fencing, original to the property or consistent with historical character." "So my gate should be protected?" I asked. "More than that," Marion replied, a smile spreading across her face. "Your entire property has limited HOA oversight. They can regulate extreme issues like abandoned vehicles or excessive trash, but they have no authority over your gate, fence, or most exterior elements." She looked up at me. "Did you know about this when you purchased the home?" I shook my head. I remember seeing something about exemptions, but in the flood of closing paperwork, I never fully understood what it meant. "This is a strong legal position," Marion assured me. "Not only did Ms. Wells commit criminal property damage, but she did so against a property where she had absolutely no jurisdiction." Over the next hour, Marion helped me prepare a comprehensive legal response. We gathered the property exemption documentation, certified copies of the original deed and grandfather clause, county records confirming the property's age, and even historical aerial photographs showing my lot existed before the surrounding development. "The security footage is damning on its own," Marion explained. "But combined with these documents proving she had no authority whatsoever over your property, Ms. Wells has exposed herself, and potentially the entire HOA, to significant liability." "What should I do now?" I asked. "Document everything. Continue cooperating with the police investigation. And most importantly, Do not reveal this information about your property status to Ms. Wells or anyone on the HOA board just yet, Marion advised. Let her continue operating under the assumption that she has authority. When the police are ready to act, that will be the perfect moment to reveal the full extent of her overreach. I left Marion's office with a leather portfolio containing certified copies of all my documentation. For the first time since moving to Willow Creek, I felt a sense of control returning. The next few days passed in careful preparation. I photographed every angle of the damaged gate and created a detailed inventory of the craftsmanship that had been destroyed. Mrs. Santiago and the Patels provided written statements about the gate's artistic value and their witness accounts from the morning after the vandalism. Mark Johnson and 3 other neighbors offered documentation of Patricia's history of selective enforcement and intimidation. Meanwhile, Patricia continued her campaign of harassment. 2 new violation notices appeared on my door, citing debris in the front yard, the remnants of the gate she had destroyed, and unauthorized security equipment, the camera that had caught her in the act. I collected these notices without response, adding them to my growing file of evidence. Each day, I noticed Patricia driving past my house, sometimes slowing to take photos with her phone. Twice, she parked across the street and appeared to be making notes while watching my property. I remained strategic in my silence. The security camera footage had been provided to the police, but I requested they allow me time to gather additional evidence before proceeding with charges. Officer Chen had agreed, understanding that building a comprehensive case would be more effective than rushing forward. Patience now will pay off later, Marion had advised. And so I waited, watching as Patricia continued to believe she held all the power, unaware that the legal ground beneath her was about to crumble completely. A week after the vandalism, I received a certified letter from the Willow Creek HOA. Inside was a formal notice of violation with a demand for immediate compliance, and a fine of $500 for continued defiance of HOA directives and maintaining a hazardous, damaged structure on the property. The letter concluded with a warning that failure to remove the damaged gate and install an approved replacement within 48 hours would result in direct intervention by the HOA Enforcement Committee. I placed the letter in my evidence file without response. That evening, while watering my garden, I noticed Patricia and 2 board members driving slowly past my house, pointing and discussing something. They did not stop or speak to me, but their purpose was clear intimidation. The following morning, precisely 49 hours after delivery of the certified letter, I was preparing breakfast when flashing lights caught my attention through my kitchen window. 2 police cruisers had pulled up outside, followed by Patricia's silver SUV. From my window, I watched as Patricia emerged from her vehicle with Craig Thompson, the HOA enforcement officer, and another man carrying a toolbox. Patricia appeared to be explaining something to the police officers, gesturing emphatically toward my property. I took a deep breath, collected my leather portfolio of documents, and stepped onto my front porch. Patricia stood at the edge of my property, clipboard in hand, speaking to Officer Rodriguez, one of the same officers who had responded to my vandalism report the week before. A new officer I did not recognize stood nearby, looking uncomfortable. "Good morning," I called out pleasantly, descending my porch steps. Officer Rodriguez nodded in my direction. "Good morning, sir. We have been called regarding an HOA compliance issue." Patricia stepped forward, triumph evident in her expression. "As you can see, officer, the homeowner has failed to remove the damaged gate despite our formal notice. As per Section 12 of our HOA bylaws, After 48 hours of noncompliance, we are authorized to remove the violation and bill the homeowner for services rendered. She gestured to Craig, who stepped forward with a toolbox. We have brought our maintenance contractor to remove the damaged gate and install a temporary fence until the homeowner installs an approved model. The second officer looked toward me. Sir, is there a reason you have not complied with the HOA directive? There are several reasons, officer, I replied calmly. The primary one being that Ms. Wells herself vandalized my gate, as evidenced by security footage already in police possession. The second reason is more fundamental. I opened my leather portfolio and removed the certified property documents. My property is exempt from HOA jurisdiction regarding exterior features, including gates. Patricia's expression hardened. That is ridiculous. Every property in Willow Creek is subject to HOA governance. Not quite, I replied, handing the documents to Officer Rodriguez. My property predates the HOA establishment by 5 years. When the HOA was formed, the original owner negotiated a grandfather clause exemption that remains with the property, not the owner. Officer Rodriguez reviewed the documents carefully, his expression increasingly serious. The second officer stepped closer to examine them as well. These appear to be county-certified records, Officer Rodriguez noted. And this addendum specifically mentions perpetual exemption for entry features. This is the first I am hearing of any exemption, Patricia interjected, her voice rising slightly. All properties in our community are subject to the same standards. That is not accurate, Ms. Wells, I responded, retrieving another document from my portfolio. This is a copy of the original HOA incorporation documents, listing the 5 properties granted partial exemptions due to pre-existing construction. My address is third on that list. Patricia snatched the document from Officer Rodriguez's hands, her composure visibly cracking as she scanned the page. This changes nothing, she insisted, though her voice lacked conviction. The homeowner has a dangerous, damaged structure that must be removed. A structure you damaged yourself, I reminded her quietly. Patricia's face flushed. I was enforcing compliance. Officer Rodriguez cleared his throat. Ms. Wells, based on these documents, it appears you had no authority to modify or damage any features of this property. Combined with the security footage, this situation is looking increasingly serious. This is absurd, Patricia sputtered. I am the HOA president. I have enforced rules in this community for 7 years. Not on my property, I stated firmly. My gate was legally installed and exempt from HOA oversight. You trespassed on my property and deliberately destroyed a family heirloom worth thousands of dollars, both in materials and irreplaceable sentimental value. The second officer turned to Patricia. Ma'am, in light of this documentation and the existing evidence, we need to continue our investigation into the property damage incident. I would advise you and your associates to leave this property immediately. Patricia stood frozen, her clipboard hanging limply at her side, as the reality of her situation began to sink in. The neighbors who had been discreetly watching from windows and porches began to emerge, drawn by the confrontation unfolding on my front lawn. Additionally, Officer Rodriguez continued, we will need you to come to the station to provide a formal statement regarding the vandalism incident. The detective assigned to the case has reviewed the security footage and believes there is sufficient evidence for criminal charges. Patricia's face paled. Criminal charges for enforcing HOA regulations. For criminal damage to property, Officer Rodriguez corrected. The fact that the property was exempt from your authority only compounds the situation. As realization dawned across Patricia's face, I saw 7 years of unchecked power crumbling. The neighbors who had gathered watched in silent satisfaction as Patricia Wells, the neighborhood tyrant, finally faced consequences for her actions. Autumn leaves swirled across my front yard as I carefully fitted the newly restored section of my grandfather's gate back into place. 3 weeks had passed since the confrontation with Patricia, and the neighborhood had transformed in ways I never expected. The criminal charges against Patricia Wells had been filed within days of our showdown. The district attorney had pursued charges of criminal damage to property, trespassing, and harassment based on the security footage and pattern of targeted behavior. Patricia had avoided jail time by accepting a plea deal that included restitution for the damaged gate, community service, and a restraining order preventing her from approaching my property. The financial consequences had been substantial. Beyond the criminal restitution, my attorney had filed a civil suit against both Patricia personally and the HOA for failing to properly oversee their president's actions. The settlement had not only covered the complete restoration of my grandfather's gate by a master metalworker, but had established a legal fund for other homeowners who had suffered similar harassment. The HOA board had called an emergency meeting the day after Patricia's arrest. With nearly every homeowner in attendance, the room had erupted in years of pent-up frustration and accounts of Patricia's reign of terror. By meeting's end, the entire board had resigned, and a new interim leadership had been elected with David, the teacher who had supported my gate appeal, as president. Mrs. Santiago approached as I finished securing the last bolt on my restored gate. "It looks beautiful," she said, admiring the craftsmanship. "Your grandfather would be proud." The metalworker did an amazing job matching his work, I agreed, running my hand along the newly forged sections that blended seamlessly with the original. Mark Johnson and his wife crossed the street, carrying a housewarming plant. "Better late than never," he said with a smile, handing me the potted succulent. "Welcome to the real Willow Creek neighborhood." Over the following days, more neighbors stopped by, some offering apologies for not standing up to Patricia sooner, others expressing gratitude for finally being freed from her tyranny. The Patels brought over dinner. The Richardsons returned to visit their old neighbors, and even the Chens came to see if their satellite dish would be welcomed back. The new HOA, under David's leadership, had already begun rewriting the bylaws to focus on community support rather than punitive enforcement. The First Amendment had been a legacy protection clause, ensuring historical and sentimental property features would be preserved and celebrated. As sunset painted the sky in brilliant orange and gold, I sat on my front porch watching children ride bikes freely down the sidewalk, an activity Patricia had discouraged as disorderly. Neighbors chatted across driveways, and garden variety had replaced conformity as properties began to reflect their owners' personalities once again. My grandfather's gate stood at the entrance to my property, more beautiful for having been broken and restored. The new lock mechanism featured a small plaque with his initials and the words, "Craftsmanship endures." The experience had taught me the importance of knowing your rights, documenting everything, and standing firm against intimidation. But perhaps more importantly, it had shown me the power of community when people finally find the courage to stand together against a bully.